Bienvenidos a inicia.do. Sigue nuestros episodios en inicia.do. Ray Wang es el creador de Constellation, quien conversa con nosotros sobre las últimas tendencias en analíticas, nuevos roles en Internet y el uso del Big Data como valor agregado para las empresas de hoy día. Conversamos con él. Where did you grow up?
Oh, I grew up in the United States and in a small town called Allentown, Pennsylvania.
And what was it like to be in a small town like Allentown?
We grew up with turkey farms, cornfields, apple orchards, wheat. It was somewhere between a very agricultural area, but we also had a lot of large companies. So it was kind of a very interesting time.
Oh, cool. Well, how did you make the transition to be in a small town, group by people, group by family, and just being in a big city? How did you make that transition, and how did it impact in your life?
Oh, you went to university, right? I went to university into a larger city, and then when you started getting jobs, you went to the urban areas.
Okay, and you started, and how did technology how did technology impact your life?
Well, there are different types of technology. I mean, I was pretty early on the internet, and we used a lot of Usenet groups. And back before there were, social communities, right? They had them already on the internet.
We were talking about the very beginning of the 90s, right?
No, even 80s.
Even 80s.
So.
It was like the user groups and you...
Well, the user groups were there, right? There were bulletin board services, the old BBSs. And that was different, right? And we had access to very crude computers, if you ever think about it. There were things like a Tandy Radio Shack, right? These big monitors that were there. We had an Apple II, right? So those were very early days of computing. So.
And how do you experience it with all this type of technologies, and how do you solve them as thinking as your future career doing that?
You don't actually. My career didn't start out in technology, but we just used a lot of technology, which made it very different, right? So I started out not in this field, but in healthcare.
Okay. So how you started in the healthcare, and how do you make the transition to technology?
It didn't happen overnight, but I would say that, I started out in a healthcare program, have a master's in public health, and I did consulting. And somewhere along consulting, you picked up a technical skill, and then it became what this is. So. And
doing the healthcare, doing that thing, and in your very beginning in profession, do you feel comfortable with that, or do you feel that it wasn't the thing that you wanted to do all your life?
I think what's very interesting in America is you can actually study one major and do something else.
Okay.
And it happens all the time. And so I think people change their jobs. Like, I've probably had 15, 16 jobs in my career. So you just keep changing, and you keep improving yourself, and you keep figuring out what is important to you and what you're interested in. And so we have a lot of flexibility in jobs, especially if you're thinking about technology. So from being in consulting, I was an SAP consultant. I was a marketing chief for a software company. I did product marketing and design. I worked at Oracle 3 times, right? So, and I worked as an analyst for a couple of firms. So it's different parts of the job you can do multiple times, and each time you go at it, you learn something different.
You work for Forrester, Altimeter, for a lot of companies, and you said that before that you jump to one job to another. What was the time do you say, I want to stop in this, I want to make my own things, I want to make my own company?
I think that was after Forrester. So 5 years into the job and you're trying to see what else you can do. And sometimes you fit in a large company and sometimes you don't. If you want to change the rules and push out to new markets, you hope your management will support you. But when they don't, you go build your own thing.
And that process, how was it? How was it to beginning your own idea and to recreating your own company?
It's never easy. I mean, it's a lot of hard work.
Tell me about it.
So, well, I mean, this is my 5th startup.
Okay.
So I would say for Constellation right now, we are almost 3 years old. So we have 20 people, we have 240 clients, and you don't sleep. So.
What was the biggest challenge creating these 5 startups? What was the most difficult startup to recreate, to make up?
I think each one is different, right? Some of them you belong to a large team and you're a member of.
Yeah.
Others you are driving everything yourself and hopefully you're building the team along the way. So I think they're very, very different. So if you're in a big team, people are moving around, you give what you need to do to help the team go. But when you're driving the team and having to come up with the ideas, you have to work very differently. So,
you were saying about the team. You were saying about the talent. How big, how important is for you creating the team? What things? What do you see in people? Do you think and you say, okay, I want that person in my team. I want those kind of people on my team.
Well, when we first started the company, we made the mistake of thinking people who had a lot of social influence were going to be very successful. And sometimes you look at the outside and you say, oh, someone has a very big brand, or they've got a big Twitter following, or they have a good reputation in the space. But you realize it's very different. For an existing established company, that might work, right? But for a startup, you need a very different mindset. You need people to be entrepreneurial. You need people to think about what can they do to move the company forward. And it's a very, very different skill set. So we actually use a tool that's called a teamability assessment from a company called the Gabriel Institute. Yeah. And we use that as a way to kind of test for what we need inside people. And so they do a 10-question assessment, and in that assessment, we then figure out, is there a fit within our culture?
There's a huge wave, there's a huge revolution around the startups in these days. And people are talking about this new generation of people making companies, especially in the tech area. What do you think about a speech that those people who are making startups are the new heroes of our generation? Do you think that's a good motto to say that in these times?
There are, right? Every startup has a religion, right? It has a purpose, it has a movement. And what we're really looking at is people recreating that, spirit of a mission. And I think people are trying to join those either to change the world or to make a difference or to create a new path or to disrupt another business model, right? And so you have that. But I do have a caution, though, is just jumping in and having your first job at a startup is probably a bad idea. I think there's some things that you learn in large companies that are really important. Yeah. And before you go to a startup, I think it's important that people learn some of the large company skills because you work in large systems. And those large systems and those skills to understand scale, that's invaluable. You have these large companies that can train you. So I would work at a large company or brand for 2 to 3 years. Okay, you're completely frustrated, then go to a startup, because you'll learn something about it. I wouldn't stay too long either, because if you stay 5 to 10 years, you're pretty comfortable, right? And you're afraid to leave and you don't take risks anymore. Yeah. But you still want to learn something about the large companies and learn as much as you can, learn as many skills as you can. Don't get pigeonholed into one area.
You say that you learned a lot of things working on huge companies, but when you started creating your first company, what was the things that you had to leave out and feel different on creating your companies? What was the things that you had to step out in working on huge companies and doing something different on your startups?
Well, I think when you have a startup, you have limited resources, right? And you learn very quickly to decide what you're not going to do. Because if you don't, you're going to spin yourself in so many directions. So your biggest strategy point is, I'm not going to do X, which means I may partner with someone else, I may purchase that area, I may acquire that area in the future, but you realize what you're not going to do. Now, once you understand what you're not going to do, you're completely focused, right? You know, if I finish this level, I get to the next level, I can actually add another area.
You're working now on Constellation, which is a company that works on analysis and analyze information, right? And how important is to analyze all this data that is on the internet now?
It's a big piece, right? We tend to attract different types of clients. We don't attract it by an industry. We don't attract it by a role like a CMO or CEO or CIO. Yeah. What we're attracting are companies that want to change, right? There's something that we look at, which is really, you look at market leaders, fast followers, cautious adopters, and laggards. There are 4 categories of companies. We tend to serve market leaders and fast followers. These are people who are not afraid of change. These are people who are ready to make a disruption in the marketplace. And for us, that's our target client. Right? If we were a legacy analyst firm, like some of the older ones, they tend to charge people who are happy. They want a rubber stamp to say that their idea is okay, and that's okay. There's a market for that. Right? But I'm not excited about that market, so it's okay.
That's cool, that's cool. What do you think about big data? Which opportunities do you see there, and how companies, how startups can approach to this new movement about big data, who is talking about 3 or 4 years?
Well, big data is a broad term, and I think a lot of people are confusing it for analytics, some people are confusing it for reporting, but let's look at the process of big data. It's really about data to decisions. You have lots of data, like the interview here is a video, the chat stream that's coming in, right? A feed from information from your transactions. That's data. What we want to do is find information, connect that information to all the different systems. Then we want to get to insight. And the insight piece is interesting. That's the patterns, right? Do I see a pattern in the data? Can I ask a question and answer that question? But the most important thing is to take that data and do something with it. Yeah. And that's the decision.
Do you think that the point is how those data around can connect each other? Do you think that's the real difference?
No, I think the difference is once it's connected and you find the insight, you can make a decision. What's the next best action? What do you want to do next, right? So you know that, for example, green sweaters are selling better here in Santo Domingo, and maybe red sweaters are selling better in Cuba. Why? I don't know, but let's figure out that question. Now, if you know that, what do you want to do next? You want to make sure you ship more green sweaters to where it makes sense, and where you ship more red sweaters where it makes sense. Right? The next question you ask is, okay, well, can I sell more? How do I do that? So it's the decisions that are important. What's my next best action? How do I get there? So that's part 1 to that. But what do you make money? Well, in the world of big data, it's pretty simple, right? Every company has information. The information inside the company is for sale. Every individual has information. If you think about all the social networks, you're the product. Yeah. You're for sale. Well, actually, they already sold you. So,
you're installed in San Francisco, and San Francisco for now in technology world is like it's the New York City of the technology world.
What's finance for New York? Yes.
Yeah.
Or London.
Exactly. Most of the tech people think that being in San Francisco is like being in the center of the world. That's correct, if I told you, but. Don't you think there's more outside of them, more in other countries like Europe, like Latin America? Why do you think that main differences between the people who are making products in San Francisco and making for the world? Why do you think it's a big difference of that?
I think the difference in San Francisco is we have a critical mass of venture capitalists, critical mass of ideas, a critical mass of people that understand startups work very differently, right? So the culture is there. It doesn't mean you cannot recreate another Silicon Valley. It just means at that scale, you won't be as successful. So looking across the United States, you have a Silicon Desert, which is what Tony Hsieh wants to do with Zappos and build around this Las Vegas core. You got Austin, right, which is also a place with a lot of technology innovation that's going on. But around the world, too, you got Silicon Roundabout, right, a part of London and Shoreditch and that area where they're trying to innovate and create startups. You got Silicon Alley, which is in New York, where it's tech and advertising. But you're starting to see specialized areas, right? So what's the difference? It's just that, you know, the center of technology at the moment is in Silicon Valley. It could change in the future. You never know. But it's a good place because people are sharing those kind of ideas. People are pushing the limits. People wake up every day and say, how do I change that business model? How do I disrupt the world? And maybe that's what they want to do. And you can do that anywhere else. You see large centers happening in Shanghai, in Beijing, in Bangalore. Yeah. You see large areas in Malaysia, in KL, and Jakarta, in Indonesia. You see that happening. So, I mean, look at Rio, right? That's another area where you're seeing a lot of innovation. Mm-hmm. So I think it's going to happen around the world, but you know, the valley is still the valley. It's a hard thing to challenge. So,
and what's next for you? You've been creating startups since the last 5, 6 years. What's next for you? What do you think? Where are you working now, and for the next month?
Well, I think for the next 3 to 5 years, I'm going to be at Constellation for a while. Yeah. We've brought in a CEO, we've had a COO, and our job is to grow out the organization. I mean, our mission really is to go out for the market leaders and fast followers and help them innovate, right? Where can we find a technology or a process or a change to transform a business model? And that's what we're researching. We don't specifically research a technology on its own. We look at where you can use that technology inside a business and make a difference. Otherwise, it would be a very, very short game. You look at one technology, it goes, it's a 3-year cycle. How do we tie this back to a business process? And so for us, we look at commerce. And we look at all the channels, we look at the demand signals, we look at supply chain, we look at payment technologies, we look at big data, and it's all wrapped around the buyer. We look at, I talked about data to decisions. It's not about big data. It's not about a data warehouse. It's not about database. It's not about Hadoop. It's how do I get this process from data and make a decision? When we look at customer experience, we don't think about just a CRM system or a social CRM or social media. We're thinking about how do I transform my customer experience? How do I get you more excited about a product? And the technologies will come.
And that is interesting, especially in the customer experience, because I think I saw an interview a couple of days ago. I think it was Bezos talking about the experience around the people that buy in Amazon, and he didn't want to change the tire and make it in Amazon. He just wanted to simplify the process. Do you think it's more about that? Do you think it will be more in the next 5 years to feel like we are shopping in real life or making decisions in real life, and we're going to transform that in the digital world?
It's going to happen, but I think in commerce, the most important thing is going to be identity. Yeah. Reducing the friction of the buying, which Amazon does with one click and instant payment and same-day delivery. Mm-hmm. So reducing that friction, but it's also the personalization experience, right? How do we engage? How do we work with people? How do we make that easy to jump between communities? So, but identity is going to be so critical, right? What happens? Can I take my Amazon identity and use it somewhere else? Can I log in with a social login? Do I use my bank card? Maybe I don't have a payroll check, but I use my pay card and that's my ID. So you're going to see all these different things transform in the next, I'd say, probably 2 to 3 years in terms of not just payments, not just commerce, but even where we are. Or maybe we're all being tracked, so.
It will be an interesting future, right?
We're recreating the Matrix, but if you want to stop, you need to fix it now, right? So, I mean, privacy is important, right? Don't buy into the Mark Zuckerberg world of privacy is dead. you have to make privacy important. And if you look at the recent NSA scandal in the US, every country but the US seems to care more about privacy. And I think if we push very hard, you'll have that protection. We don't want to leave that big digital exhaust of everywhere where you're going to be available without your permission, without your rights, but it's happening very quickly.
And it's going to be all around the customer and their decisions to feel comfortable in the digital world.
Well, we're trading privacy for convenience. One of the things that's very scary is when we lose our cash. When you lose the day that you can actually make a purchase and nobody knows what you bought, we've lost. You cannot get rid of cash.